Well, welcome, Mr. Peter Collins from Australia. One of my great friends now for a while. Uh, I many moons ago. I'm talking over 3 decades. I was a student of Peter Daniels. Peter Daniels is someone that did a lot in the sales profession. A lot of the companies today that are multi-level, he's the one that established the rules. A lot of people don't know that. And he also owned, like, I forget how many miles beachfront property there in Australia. I don't know if he's still alive or not, but I went to his seminars here when he would come. I met him. I took a couple of photos. I just don't know what happened to those photos, but I do have them somewhere. But I like to, well, first I want to introduce our co-host, Adrianita. Thank you for joining us and being our co-host. Peter and I, we appreciate having a pretty face like yourself. And I like to introduce to you guys someone in whom I have a lot of respect. He's a best-selling author. He's been a trainer for a few years, very, very successful. And he is someone, uh, I love that accent from Australia. And then our bucket list, I've talked to Adriana. We want to go to Australia and we want to go some of those places. And hopefully, Peter, we have the honor to meet you not just via Zoom, not just, via what do you call it, FaceTime, like we've talked a couple of times, but, physically to, get to know you, to shake your hand, and perhaps even meet your family. You've been a great, great friend. So, without any further ado, Peter, if you can go ahead and take it away, tell us who you are, what you do, and uh, what have you been doing all these years, literally changing the landscaping of so many lives? Because by following your questionnaires, your dialogue in a form of question, you have literally changed a lot of people's lives. And professional sales is one that, no matter at what level, even when a child is an infant, he learns that if he doesn't get the attention of mom and start hollering and yelling and start selling, marketing himself, he's not going to get fed. He's not going to get clean. So, anyways, Mr. Collins, take it away, please.
Mano, it's an absolute privilege to be in the presence of royalty, especially in sales. And I take my hat off to you for what you've achieved through your lifetime as well. In my case, um, I'm in my 70s these days, and I'm unfortunately not getting any younger. So I'm prepared to pass on everything that I've done throughout my lifetime. Now, this in about a month from now, I will start my 57th year in selling. So I've had a reasonable track record in that time. I've written 72 business books, a lot more books besides that. I'm in the Hall of Fame 3 times now with multinationals. I have a background of rewriting record books. Now, I don't want to talk too much about that
No,
because
please do. We have
feel
the main thing is, I believe that success breeds success, and we want to know about you because someone with that kind of track record, Jim Rohn says success leaves traces, and you left a lot of traces, and we want to know about it. Please. So, have the freedom.
Thank you. Look, one of the things I wanted to bring up is when the coronavirus hit earlier this year, I sat a bit like you. I just went into recluse for a little while to work out what needed to be done because the pandemic hit so hard, it affected so many people. And the one thing that I came up with is, first up, we need a hand up and not a handout. And most of what's been happening because of the coronavirus is basically a handout. And I think that belittles people and it also reduces their ability to move forward effectively. And that really concerns me. And I'll tell you why it concerns me. It got to the point where one of my closest friends actually bottomed out. Now, he was a top salesperson in that company for 5 years, and he never had figures as bad as that. And I thought I'd better put my coaching hat back on after a couple of years because I haven't coached for a while. And I started working with him on a day by day by day basis. Within a couple of months, he not only became the top salesperson in that company, but he broke every record personally in that company as well. The next month, he took his group to the best figures in Australia's history. Now, this guy is in a domestic blinds company, and these are the worst months to get those numbers. The following month, with my coaching, and I'm proud to say that, he ended up with the best company figures in Australia's ever. He topped every state. And those figures, I believe, are so high, they're going to be hard to break for anybody in the future. But then to top it all off, this same person ends up with what they call a gold medallion in his company. What that means is the only guy in that company's history, 40-year history, that's ever hit that level of sales. Now, that's just one. There's 4 people that got involved in what I was doing with that. Every one of their figures increased exponentially. And that can be done during the pandemic. Believe you me, it's all mindset. And if you get your mindset right, everything else follows.
Wow, that's very, very neat. Adriana, you said you had a few comments, questions, and you couldn't wait to, have this dialogue with Mr. Collins, please.
Well, I was 72 business books written, sales consultant, coach and trainer, 3 times International Hall of Fame. Wow. I'm sure we
Yeah,
have a lot to take notes
take notes,
on what you
absolutely.
you have a lot to show us, teach us. But what you just spoke about your friend that you put your coach hat back on once the pandemic hit for this person. What if I ask you this specific question? What do you attribute that success of that person during this pandemic time? Like what, his numbers change, pandemic hits, you come back and coach him. What specifically would you attribute this to? Obviously, he had the desire because he saw his numbers suffered and you come into the picture. So what do you attribute this to?
Well, it was very simple. Going into a coaching environment, most people, when they're coaching others, are always looking how they can improve that person. So the first thing you do when you look for improvement, you start looking for faults. Now, as a manager, that's the worst thing you can do. You should build a person so that that person can grow exponentially within themselves before they grow physically and mentally out into the marketplace. And if you start looking for good things and build on what they already do well, those things that they do badly will start to fall away. I've used that process now in management for over 40 years, and it works extremely well. Now, in my upcoming advanced sales training program, I actually go into detail of how I help that person move to the next step. And I use a 5-point plan to work with it. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to work on this today.
Right, right.
But
We don't have to finish it all today, Peter. I intend to continue, if you accept our invitation, learning, teaching, coaching, learning new habits, re-engineering ourselves. It's a continued process. It's one that it's never over. Right here, right now, we're here in our office, and we have an electrician because some of the internet was not working and they had to do some changes, do rewires and things. And this is something that, I mean, it's a never ending thing. The day that we end it and we decide not to improve, not to take those extra steps, that's the day that, in my opinion, you say, well, I'll just keep my ground. No, there's no such thing. You're either moving forward or the current is taking you back. So we definitely want to re-engineer ourselves. And I like to ask the same thing that Adriana asked from a different angle. What percentage of people that you have taught these principles and that actually apply them? I hear so much people saying knowledge is power. Knowledge is not power. Applied knowledge is power. So when you teach and coach these people, these professionals, and they literally roll up their sleeves and get to work, what percentage do you think they improve from the previous, or let's say that they don't follow your course? What are the differences? Can you share with us?
All right. Look, I think the important thing is in my upcoming sales training program, I put in writing and I put on the table that anybody that takes this course on
Hmm.
will definitely improve their sales by over 300%.
Wow.
Now, that's something that I've personally seen happen with people. And I can validate this even today because just more recently, I've had people reviewing my sales training program. And one of these guys that I got to review this has been in timeshare for over 40 years. He's a seasoned salesman. And the difference with most people in timeshare is they grow between 10 or 15%. And if they can get close rates at that level, most companies think they're doing a great job. Well, my friend has been in timeshare now for that 40 years with a 30% close rate,
Wow.
which is double what everybody else is doing. But let me just add one more thing. He started working with my first lesson. By the way, my first lesson on video goes for 5 hours. So
Okay. Okay.
more into one lesson than most people put into a full sales training program.
Mhm.
And he started going through it. I've not been able to get him to go into the second lesson because he's now going through the first lesson the 4th time.
Yeah. Wow.
And he tells me every time he goes through the lesson, he not only learns a lot more, but he has 5 or 6 legal pages of notes as well. And he wants to share them with me. I said, no, just tell me the main point that you want to bring up. And this guy has now improved his sales out of sight. The other thing is, with a little bit of coaching, I said something to him with what he told me that with what he was doing, had he taken my information 40 years ago on what I was about to tell him, he would have had 20 or 30% more sales per annum. He got back to me 2 days later saying, you're 100% right. People have told me the same thing over and over again over the years. I finally twigged with what I should be doing.
That's amazing. Would you like to piggyback on that, Adriana, or uh, you know,
I have a
Adrian?
comment. I have a
Okay.
comment. Your person, the client that you're talking about, this business person, Peter. This is exactly what Amado or Armando does when he reads a book. He reads a book and he goes back to the chapter. I always see this. I read a book and I go pages. I finish the book. If I have a question, I can go back to a chapter. No, he just reads that same manner, taking the time and reading and rereading, and I want to digest it. So it's interesting that you said that you're coaching somebody who just go back and he's not moving forward because he thinks I need to understand this very, very well before I move on. So that's interesting. And um, if we, how much value did you give to improvement? How much value to improvement of persistence, maybe in sales? What's the value?
Okay, well, let me try and answer it this way. And sorry for cutting you off. The process that I've used, you can go to my library, and I've got a very big library of books. And in that library, every book that you'll pick up has 2 things in it. It has underlines and it has highlights. The first time I read a book, I underline it. So when I come back to that book, I know exactly where to go to, or the chapter that'll give me the greatest value. And then I start using underlines. Then I'll go back sometime later because I need that information, and then I'll highlight with a different color as well. That's how I've read books all my life.
Uh,
And I find it works.
Yeah,
uh,
that's
Peter, by the way, thank you for sending me that commentary on the book of Psalms. And I find that people like yourself, Jim Rohn, Peter Daniels, is your faith that gets you into that zone where it becomes very passionate and very powerful to penetrate to people's will, to their, to the where they're hungry to do that. And reading some of your notes, and uh, Peter Daniels, when he used to talk about reading, he won on one of his seminars, he spoke about the word meditation. And what the word meditation, he spoke about, he gave the illustration that a cow, the way that it chews, first it goes into one stomach, and then it comes back to the mouth with new flavor. Second stomach, new flavor. Third stomach, that's meditation. And in reading, when you can go into that level where you penetrate and you understand that person's like thinking, motive, what is that person really saying, what is that person really conveying. And I think in sales, one of the reasons why somebody like Adriana is so successful in her clients and loves her is because she's someone that she asked the right questions, Peter. And that's one of the, perhaps, I don't know if it's an argument, a comment, but people always say you got to use scripts. And I have nothing against that. But to me, a better system, a better method is what you teach. Ask the right questions so that you can listen to people's needs and guide them in the direction where you get a decision. And Adriana, she's mastered the art of closing. And I always say for the hours that Adriana works and the production that she does, and she's been a consistent top producer all these years, but she's very focused. And when she's in front of that prospect, she really practices, although she's never met you, but the principles that you're teaching, I've seen her do that. And I mean, her results are nothing short of, a 10. So tell us about, your techniques about asking questions, what kind of questions. I like what you said about when you say about self-improvement, that we look into ourselves wanting to improve areas that are not necessary to improve. And, you want to master those things that are going to, make you money in the marketplace. And you want to perfect those things and mature those things and build those habits so that, when you're in front of that prospect, they feel that you care for them, that you understand them, and that you're going to help them. Please, Peter.
I'm glad you're bringing this up because to me, the questioning process
Yes.
should reveal two things. The first is your questioning process should get their attention because people will wander mindlessly into all sorts of things if you don't grab their attention. The second thing is prospects will actually reveal how they want to be sold. And most people have not got to understand that particular part of the questioning process. Now, I first learned questioning more than 40 years ago, maybe 45 years ago, and it changed the way that I sold dramatically. Now, the questioning process should not only just get people's attention, but want them to communicate with you. And that's something else that most people don't do very well. Now, best way to explain this, ask a good question, you get a good answer. Ask a mediocre question, you get a mediocre answer. Yeah. And if you ask a dumb question, guess what you're going to get?
I like the law of reciprocity. Well, you know what? I just wrote this, the questioning process, and it reminds me, when I go to my doctor for my yearly checkup, he doesn't use scripts. First he wants to make sure he asks me questions. Do I have any pains? He asks me questions, and based on the way I answer those questions, then he's always helped me, and he's been my medical doctor literally for years, and I'm very comfortable. And we as professionals, my attorney, he's been my attorney for almost 30 years. I seen him this morning, and again, I go in, we kind of social, and then he asks me questions. So realtors or sales professionals, I feel is the same, because that people are not talking about that. A lot of these speakers or trainers, sad to say, they're entertainers, and it's entertaining to watch them. I enjoy it. They tickle my ears and they make me feel good. but that's not what it's all about, you know. So please expand on that, you know. And I'm taking notes, by the way.
Look, I want to, because I think this is an area that most people need to understand. First up, and I learnt this process again 40 or 50 years ago. I had some very good mentors in those days. And the first thing they said to me, if you went to an engineer and the guy said, I've got a 30% success rate, would you take any advice off him? Or you went to a doctor and said, look, I can do operations all the time, but I'm 30% successful.
Yeah.
You know, and on it goes. Nobody in any profession will ever brag about being successful at the low end. So why is it salespeople want to tell you they've got a conversion rate of 30%, 20%, 10%? That is ridiculous. Now, the one thing that I learned to do early in the piece, and I started mastering the art of closing the sale back in the 70s when nobody else was doing it. I was the first guy in the world to put out a series of audio tapes on closing the sale. In fact, 1 year before Zig Ziglar put out his closing pack.
Wow.
And in 83, he did his in 84. The important all of that was I would road test over 1,000 different closing techniques to write a book on 50 ways of closing the sale. Wow. Now I've got 7 volumes of the same book. So I've road tested a couple of thousand closing techniques, and I don't write about them till I know they work. Now, here's the important part with all of this. Whenever I've gone and started a new career, a new job, worked for a new company, or even consulted with them, I would write out 100 questions for that particular industry. Physically write them out, memorize them, read them out aloud, try and do the best I could to have them roll off the tip of my tongue. I would also then go and write out 100 comebacks. So whenever I got into a questioning process with anybody, I would have the question roll off at the tip of my tongue. Now, the questioning process, most people don't get it in sales because when they ask a question, they're flying by the seat of their pants, and they're now thinking about the next question while the prospect is answering that question. They're not listening, they're thinking, and they stop themselves from being able to communicate. The professional salesperson, everybody I know, will listen and listen intently to the answer of the question they've just asked. Then all of a sudden, they will pause. And the reason for the pause and why it's so important is the minute you start to pause, if the person has something more to say, it'll roll off their tongue while you're pausing. And you will get the full answer. Now, most salespeople are jumping in even before they finish talking, but the prospect finishes talking with their next question. Look, the front of mind, if you've rehearsed those 100 questions, 100 comebacks, it'll become automatic. It'll come from the top of your mind. You'll know exactly what to say. You've rehearsed it. It'll be polished. It'll be professional, and it'll get the people's attention. And that's the most important thing, because if you haven't got their attention, you haven't got anything. Now, can I expand on getting the attention bit, because this is so crucial, and most people don't know the psychology behind it. We all know, and we've all heard this before, whatever you say will get you a 7% attention span with the prospect. The way you say it, that attention span can go up to as high as 37%, and the perception that they have of what you say can be as high as 57%. Wow. So those particular factors need to be taken into account. But I'll now teach you something that I've been teaching for 30 or 40 years, and I don't know anybody else that's ever taught this before. First up, most people, when they're presenting, will talk at between 80 and 125 words a minute. Sometimes people want to get up to 150 words a minute. Well, it comes at that rate, it starts to confuse people because they're not able to listen that hard. But the important thing here is what people also don't know is tertiary educated people actually read at 250 to 300 words per minute. But most people without a tertiary education, like people in the trades or people that have laboring work, can't read faster than they can talk. What comes out of their mouth is a speed that they read at. So unless you're on the same page with those people reading at their level, you're going to confuse them no end. You'll be so far ahead, they will not be able to think how to catch up.
Wow.
Now, here's the most important part. Every one of us actually thinks at 550 and 600 words a minute. That's a very high level of thought pattern. Now, if you're talking at 125 words a minute and you haven't got their attention to start with, guess what's happening? The void is so great that 450 words a minute difference between their thinking and your talking. So if you haven't got their attention, guess what? Their mind will wander somewhere else. And the minute their mind wanders somewhere else, you're dead. You have nowhere to go.
Yes.
Wow.
Unless,
Yeah.
yes, unless you're bringing in something of value, and the pause will help you do that. By pausing, you actually get them more involved. By being able to work with them at their level, they will then begin to trust you. And the most important thing in selling is trust. Because if you haven't got trust, you don't go anywhere. But the minute you start to build on your trust, they start to build on the ownership. Selling is not about you transferring your feeling. It is about you getting to own the product. And the more they start to own the product, the more trust that they will build. The next stage that they move into is they now start to get confidence in you as an individual, because they not only trust you, but they are starting to hang on to every word you say. Now, the more they trust you, the greater your ability to sell. It starts and stops there. It doesn't go any further.
Well, Peter, one of the things that I've always been taught, and I was very fortunate enough, and to, like I said, learn from some of the best trainers in the world. And I've always been told when you speak, your tempo, your pitch has to be in proportion to those that you're talking to. Because if you're out of tune, I remember in my previous career, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I got up and I spoke and I told them, we were working on this plane and we're going to develop it. And the company sent me to train these people. And then when I finished, one of the young men looked at me and he said, "Gee, you all talk funny." And I immediately laughed, and that laugh, it broke that barrier, because they saw that I was, I wasn't just like a company person, but I was somebody that human just like them, and I wanted to work with them. From there on, I mean, they invited me to their house, and in that kind of culture, when you go in their house, you want a beer, you go to the refrigerator and you get it. Their house is your house. And that kind of culture, when you embrace it, then like you say, they trust you. And to earn that trust, and it's so, I'm taking notes on the fact that you say about the way we think, because, like myself, I speak two languages and I'm very blessed to do that. And, like the tempo that I speak, for instance, Spanish is completely different than English. The Spanish that I speak, I am from Mexico, versus the Spanish that Adriana from Colombia speaks is different. And sometimes she has to slow down for me and I try to speed up, because even though, Spanish is Spanish, it's not. It's like your English and our English. It's, you use the eloquent English, the that English with "thou shall not," and I love that, and I can't get enough of that. Adriana, please continue with your question.
I have $1 million question for Peter.
Okay, I like that. He's got a $1
Do you
million
think-
answer.
I'll take the $1 million.
Listen, Peter, do you think salesperson, they're born or they're
Oh,
made?
wow, that's powerful.
Because and I'm taking notes also, okay?
Yes.
I know, the conversation with somebody, you have to mirror that person,
Mirror
how
image,
you mirror, yeah, that's what you do, the whole
Born or
conversation
learn.
to click. with that client, right? But I do have an opinion to that question, but I wanted to ask you, do you think salespeople are born or they are, you can make them
Created.
become?
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Before I answer that, can I look? I'm from the old school.
Hmm.
You don't go to the next subject until you finish the previous one,
I
and
like
Okay,
you
yes.
get consensus, because otherwise, without that consensus, without that agreement, you're flying all over the place and you don't know how you've consolidated or whether you've consolidated, and what you then start flying by the seat of your pants, and that's not the way to sell. You've got to be in control all of the time. So
Mhm.
the way that I wanted to answer, finish up that last segment we were
please.
talking about
Mhm.
is pacing. One of the things that salespeople don't get is they have a speed that they actually present at, but the prospect is a slow talker,
Mhm.
or the prospect's a really fast talker. Now, the biggest thing that you can fall into after 3 or 4 responses from the prospect, because they're talking so fast, you start talking the same speed. No, that then disorients your brain. Speed up a little, maybe 10%. Show that you're reflecting what they're saying. If they're talking slow, slow down, maybe 10%, no more. And that gives them the understanding that you're hearing them out very carefully and you're trying to work at their level. That's the most important thing a salesperson can do. Pacing is something people don't learn and is not taught, unfortunately, but is a vital part of selling. Now, salesperson, are salespeople born, are salespeople made? I want to start by talking about a guy called Zig Ziglar.
Yeah.
And this was a favorite subject of his because he said, when my son was born, I signed a birth certificate that did not say the world's greatest salesman. He wasn't born into that role. He became a great salesman, but he had to learn and had to appreciate what that role's all about. I'm of the same school. I believe that there's no such thing as a born salesman. People turn around to a lot of people, untrained people, people without any sales knowledge, and will say to somebody, you should be in sales. You're a fast talker. Guess what? They get into sales 6, 12 months later, they make such a mess of everything that they do. They have to get out of sales. They don't leave sales. They get thrown out of sales because nobody wants to talk to them anymore. Nobody wants to deal with a con man
Yeah.
or a con woman. They're the only people that call themselves naturally born salespeople. And you know, I've hired thousands and thousands of people through the course of my management. And the one thing, I will not hire people that tell me I'm a born salesman. I can talk the ice out of an Eskimo, or I can sell the sand to an Arab. I don't need people that can sell sand to an Arab or sell ice to an Eskimo. They're not the people that you want on your side. You want genuine people that can relate to people. And the first is, most people don't understand this point as well. You have to stop selling and you need to start helping. The minute you can get hold of that prospect or that concept, guess what will happen? Your sales will go through the roof. Adriana, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. Yeah, I like that answer, of
You
course.
know, Peter, along that line, uh, I once told my dad, Dad, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And he came and put his hand right there, and he shook his hand and smiled and said, son, that he said, what you just said, that's because you don't know horses. I said, what do you mean? He says, look, you take some salt, put it in the horse's mouth, and then anything that looks like water, the horse is going to want to drink. And I think in sales, what you said about creating that need and creating that bond between that product or service that you're selling with that prospect, and that's the art of sales, in my opinion. And Adriana and I, we talk about this all the time. And I mean, I just think also, Peter, that it's not that some people are born to sell and some people are not, but I just think that a lot has to do with our own interests. And I believe that, you said it right. If I see a need I mean, it's like we see so many tenants. Okay, I give you a good example, and they're paying a tremendous amount of rent with no benefit. And the laws in this country are made for homeowners. You get a tax deduction. You have the freedom of ownership. Uh, you have the appreciation. You have, I mean, like right here, I don't know in Australia, but here you can get a loan, a fixed rate loan at 3%, 3.5 for 30 years. If you're renting an apartment unit or apartment units, I doubt that you're going to get a tenant and sign a 10-year lease without increasing cost of living, without increasing, maintenance. I doubt it. A friend of ours, Mr. Bruce Norris, was in a room full of people that own shopping centers and apartment units. And to illustrate that point, he asked the question to over 3,000 people: how many of you would lease your unit to a tenant for 30 years fixed? Please stand up. Not one soul stood up. And I just think that in sales, pacing, mirror imaging, like Adriana does, asking the right questions, but you also, in my humble opinion, need a mentor as yourself, as me, as Adriana, to, we have gone that path already where we already know what works and what doesn't work. And, like in our case, your case, my case, Adriana's case, we continually need to hear. There are certain principles that they don't change, no matter. But then the methods, they change. I mean, look what we're doing today. This Prior to the pandemic, I didn't even know what the word Zoom meant. But with during the pandemic and watching you watching social media, watching this and that, when I came back immediately, I asked my administrator to order me a laptop. I didn't have a laptop. We have desktops all over the office, but I said, no, give me a desktop, and then I want you to install Zoom. And then it took me a good 2 to 3 weeks. Adriana's my witness, to learn how to use it. And then when I went from Zoom to Facebook Live, I was missing about a second and a half, and I couldn't figure it out. And I asked different people, and I said, well, some said, well, I didn't have a connect line, to the wireless system. I didn't have this. I asked the experts, and then just playing with it myself, I found out that if I just erase everything and just go directly to Zoom, Zoom is directly connected to Facebook, and I can see myself and hear myself exactly. And in sales is the same thing. The market changes in proportion to the demand. Sometimes the buyers, they're in control because you have a large inventory of houses like we did 207, 208, 209, and you have a limited of qualified buyers. Well, today is the opposite. Today, there's a lack of inventory and there's a lot of buyers, and the interest rate where it's at, I mean, in my lifetime, I've never, seen it that low. So, to me, what does one need to do to continue to cultivate that passion to, because, in a nutshell, also, us as sales professionals, we're really not like, I don't really sell houses per se. I present my services and I guide people through the process. And then I bring we bring them to a final conclusion. If it's a seller, we give them the proceeds and the check, whatever their equity was. If it's a buyer, we hand them the key to the property. And so those are different roles that we as realtors provide, or sales professionals selling our services and houses. So what do we need to do to teach ourselves to continue with that pacing, with that questioning process, learning to follow that pitch and tempo? Please, I know that's your expertise, Peter. Please.
I think you've handled what you've said extremely well. In fact, you've given me about 4 different answers to give you.
Oh, well, please give us all 4.
All right. First up, and I think this is a very important issue.
Okay.
You talked about leading the horse to water, right? And when I first started putting together everything I wanted to do with the pandemic that hit us just recently, 6 months or so back, I started reflecting on 2 things, which are very important. Hands up. In other words, your hand, lift somebody up from where they are, and a handout. And I think I spoke on that before. Most of us have got used to handouts because that's what the pandemic has created. Unfortunately, it's where it's wrong. Now, if you go back to the original concept of what was said, it's the process of you can hand somebody a fish and you'll feed them for a day. But if you teach them how to fish, they'll feed themselves for the rest of their life. And part of what's missing in the selling process or the sales training is most sales trainers are not at the top of their tree. The private ones are, but the ones employed by companies are usually the middle of the road sellers that didn't make it too well, but they needed somebody to train people on how to sell. So what they're doing is teaching people how to pick up low-hanging fruit. In other words, the easy, but not the more difficult ones. And I think that's a crying shame. When you start coming into the marketplace with what you've just provided us with just there, Amado, is magic. That is gold, because you're now suggesting that people start to learn for themselves. And one of the things that you and I would have been aware of in our early days of selling, we didn't have too many videos. We didn't have too many other pieces of equipment that we could use. So we would sit in front of a mirror and we would rehearse every one of our lines, because in front of a mirror, you could see your body language, you could see your gestures, you could see your facial expressions. Today, people do it with a video or they do it with a smartphone even, right? They're so much more advanced and so much more capable of learning than what we ever were. But the one thing that I have found is the quality of selling has dropped dramatically because of the internet as well. Because people are taking on what's the right word? Unqualified things to do from people that never knew how to sell, that have now called themselves experts. And I'm sorry, they're not an expert as far as I'm concerned. What they do is they drag down the sales industry, and that's not the way to go. Now, I just want to bring something up which I think is very important. People will only warm to you quickly if you bring in emotion in whatever you're doing, because with emotion, that develops passion. And once they're passionate about something, it's contagious.
Yes, right.
You can talk in a whisper and you can have their attention 100%. Come on. It's all about the passion. If you're not passionate, you shouldn't be in sales. If you are passionate, you should be in front of a prospect all the time. Don't sit in the appointments. Just get out there and sell. And the more of that you do, the more rewards you'll get. And the other thing too, I've always been a believer of one more call. Now, whether it's one more prospecting call, one more face-to-face call, if you do one more call every day,
one more call,
guess what happens? You've just increased your potential to sell by 15, 20, 30%, whatever, depending on the industry you're in. Now, I just want to bring to your attention something which I researched specifically for this presentation today. There's a guy called Joe Girard who died recently, and he's a Cadillac salesman. You know who I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. I read his book. Absolutely. Top salesperson in it. Yeah. Sure.
The thing with Joe Girard, he was such a good salesman, he didn't do any selling most of the time. He would just send out thank you notes. Every month, you would get a thank you note from him, or you get a Christmas card from him, you get a birthday card, or your wife would get a birthday card. That's how meticulous he was. And people would roll up at that the Cadillac dealership, and they would come in and sit. And the sales manager would come up and say, look, can we help you? No, I'm here to see Joe. and they'd sit for a whole day just to buy a Cadillac.
Yeah. Yeah.
In his best year, 1973, he sold a total of 1,425 Cadillacs in 1 year. Nobody beat that record since 1973. And it wasn't until a guy called Ali Redder in 2018, December 2018, actually beat that record. He sold 1,582. But it took 37 years before somebody worked out the process to beat that record.
Wow.
So there's a big benefit in writing out thank you notes. And a lot of people don't understand what a thank you note is, let alone anything else. I remember when I worked in the home, the first thing I would do is drop a thank you note in the letterbox before I left the premises. Whenever I worked in an office, the first thing I'd do is I'd put a thank you note, put a postage stamp on it, and send that thank you note to the person. It's easier because we've got emails and whatever, but I still think the handwritten note is far more powerful than an email could ever be.
You know, Peter, Adriana's question was very, very powerful, but I just think that perhaps the angle where she asked, you know, it needed a little more, how should I say, it's a great question, but I believe that this is what I believe, okay? There's a distinction between a sales professional and an order taker. In a time where, you know, let's say the houses were way underpriced and you have 100 listings, okay, and you got them from the bank, and you have, you know, 100 investors or more writing offers on those listings. That's really not selling, that's order taking, okay? Sales is where you talk to the prospect, the seller, and, you know, and convince that seller that you're the best person to market their property and to get the top dollar in their pocket. Sales is where you convince that buyer that the time is right, is the right house. It's a good investment. It's going to be great for their family, and you make them take ownership of that house to where they can feel that, you know, all of a sudden, I mean, they see themselves having families over for barbecues. They see themselves at Christmas, you know, having the Christmas tree by the fireplace. They visualize that. And in my humble opinion, that's where 100-degree gap is, because people confuse, you know, you mentioned like the fast talkers or the prostituted salespeople. But to me, you know, the opposite side of the pendulum is order takers, and sales is not, you know, order taking. Sales is having the finesse, like I said. And I mean, I always praise Adriana because she's amazing at her game and asking questions. And how do you define an order taker and a professional sale? You know, someone that takes your courses, reads your books, follows your training, your coaching, and somebody that just wants to wing it.
Well, great question. I've got no time for anybody that wants to wing it because they're basically not even part of the selling process. They're there in person. That's about as far as they go. Their closing rate will reflect how bad they are. But I think the most important thing is the passion a salesperson can bring to the table is the most important thing. Now, you brought up a few things which I would embrace around value building. Because you can't develop passion, you can't develop trust, you can't develop ownership without value building. At every stage, you need to build value, close it off, then go to the next stage and build more value. In a house, the way that I'd see it, most people I know will buy the house because of the kitchen or the bathroom or the garage, whatever it is. Whatever that value relates to with them is what you need to work on. Now, I bring that down to two things. Good salesmanship or good salespersonship these days, I'm sorry,
Wow, okay.
is all about proactivity.
Okay.
That's
Wow, I like it.
something I learned
Mhm.
in my early stages. Now, I'm probably talking 40, 50 years ago. I was taught how to be proactive. Proactive means, and I'll use the old-fashioned phrase that we used then, we used to go out and catch and kill all of our own sales. So
Wow, wow.
a lot of oldies will understand what I've just said, but the younger generation would freak out because it's not politically correct. I don't care.
Yeah.
I still like the idea of the chase,
Mhm.
finding the prospect, working with the prospect, turning the prospect beyond that, and creating a client. That's always been the way that I've worked. Now, in that process, by the way, my closing rate for the last 40 years has been fluctuating between 86% to
Wow.
92%.
Wow.
Right?
That's
So
yeah.
that's what I can bring to the table. But the most important thing to bring to the table here is the area of passion. Now, emotion draws people in. And once they're drawn in, they start to listen intently. And without them listening intently, you've got people that'll probably come up with objections. To me, objections shouldn't happen. They
Yeah.
should be dealt with before the presentation.
Yeah.
You listen to the person intently right at the very beginning in your pre-talk. You then should be armed with what you need in order to be able to sell. And if you're not armed, you're not listening.
Wow. Wow. Very, very powerful. Adriana, you have a comment on that.
Um, yes, I do. One of the things that you mentioned before, just before this last segment, was that the person that just died, the guy that sold cars, the Cadillac, okay? Gerard was the
George
last
Rara.
name.
George
Joe
Okay.
Rara.
Gerard,
One of the things that he did, and it comes, that I listen and I follow Brian Buffini. And one of the things that I do, and Mando knows this, is my postcards, my thank you cards. They're right here on my desk. And, my thank you cards, okay?
Yeah.
They're very pretty. And I send them out 4 or 5 a day, daily.
Yeah.
That's one of the, when you said, and that some people may call it old school, all right? It's like, but I think relationship development. In that relationship, you're like 80% want the client, when you have those referrals coming to you. That I think very, very powerful. The constant and the thank you, and you just leave a house and you thank them. We're like, I don't know, the new generation, it doesn't think that way. I don't know how you present this to your clients, Peter, or if they take everything that you suggest, and follow a path of what we need to do so we get you to your sales to increase. Not sure, but I believe in that. The thank you, the Brian Buffini, one of the people that I follow. Um, but very good, very good point.
Adriana, I think you've unlocked the door to an even more powerful subject here,
Mm.
because when it comes to follow-up, I'll tell you statistically what actually happens with follow-up. Less than 10% of salespeople will actually follow up with an existing client. Less than 10%. So if you're following up more than 10% of your clients, you're at the top end. You're not one of the normal salespeople. The other thing is, what most people don't realize, and this is why I'm so happy you saying what you just said with those cards that you send out every day, is this. It takes at least 5 follow-ups before they volunteer referrals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
5 follow-ups and you'll start getting referrals. Now, a lot of people say, no, I get referrals on the first call. Yeah. How many do you close? The referrals you get on the first call are very lightweight referrals. Whenever I get referrals in a call that I make on the first call, the second call, or the third call, I try and qualify it. They might give me 5 referrals. They might give me 10 referrals. I'll then turn the paper around that I've been writing on and say, out of these 10 referrals, which 3 would you recommend I get in touch with, and tell me why? So now I've not only got the referral, but I've got the reason to make contact. Now, the next stage is while I'm in the house, you've got a phone, I've got a phone. Bring out your phone. You've got a Teledex in your phone, or a list of your friends. Just dial that number and tell them I'll be in touch with them. In fact, no, don't do that. When you've talked to him, said, I've just come across this fantastic product. My friend is sitting here opposite me. Talk to him. He wants to make an appointment. Now, using that technique at one stage in my career, I made 39 appointments on the trot without picking up the phone once.
Wow.
It broke a world record. The thing is, I should have got it to the 40, which I was going for. I blew it.
Wow. Wow.
But I sold 39 in a row straight off referrals.
Wow.
So this is the power of what you've got in your hand when you start doing effective follow-up. And the other thing I did with those people, I kept the follow-up going. I actually got into communities that I couldn't talk with before, but I worked out how they wanted to be sold. And all of a sudden I get referral after referral in this one community, which was so hard to sell. I think you've got communities like that over there. I don't want to mention.
Oh yeah. Peter, believe it or not, the time has gone.
Oh, what a shame.
To invite you again. It's just, my God, we just went to, took a few days off to Cancun, and we went to a couple of places where they had so much food, and I'm talking like good, high quality food. And right now I feel the same, it's like, wow. In closing, Adriana, what would you like to say?
My goodness, so the time went so fast, so much to explore, so much to learn from Peter. I would love for him to accept our invitation for the near future. I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for the knowledge that you have shared with us today.
Thank you so
Well,
much. Peter, in closing,
yeah.
what would you like to say, sir?
I want
How
to.
do we get a hold of you? How do we get a hold of your books?
Okay.
Please.
I want to say, look, I'm so grateful to spend this time with you because I admire what you people are doing over there. And my hat goes off to you for being able to sustain what you've done for so long. Now, if you've got a pen and paper ready, I didn't bring anything with me, but my website is www.profitmakersales.com. Now, if you go to that website, it'll list my full range of books that I've written over the last 51 years now. And it also has, I believe at this stage, 12 books that you can download for free. If you want any of the other books, the prices are there. They're in Australian dollars, so you're getting a bargain.
Peter, with all due respect to you and to those that you have served, probably the quote that comes to my mind, and I happen to know the president, the boss of this guy, and the gentleman, he's no longer with us, Jim Rohn. He said one of his quotes, he said, "Success leaves traces." And
Yes.
Peter, you're leaving a lot of traces. And on behalf of Adriana, myself, and all our audience that are listening, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. May God bless you and keep you, and may His face continue to shine upon you. God bless you. And have a great, great evening. We love you, Peter.
Thank you. God bless you both as well. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.